Good morning and welcome to the post-legislative week ahead. We're going to do a quick wrap-up of what happened leading up to the final enactment of the budget, the three-day shutdown, and everything else in between, and try and give folks an idea of where we are and where we're headed in the next few weeks, because they're not done yet.
The major work is done, though. The big
poll is done. The shutdown is over. So going back to that, the Friday night before of the shutdown on the 30th, we were in the State House. There was the makings of a deal that had come out of the Committee of Conference. It appeared that the Democrats in the House and in the Senate and the Republicans in the Senate were on board. But when the bill went to the main House of Representatives for a final enactment of 2/3, didn't happen.
No, the votes weren't there. I think it garnered 60 House Republicans on the first round. So that led into the government shutdown that we're all now aware of that lasted for a few days. But I will say it happening on a Friday night into a Saturday, Sunday, and a holiday weekend, the average person probably didn't notice it as much in terms of the government shutdown. And then with the extension of employees getting the administrative day on Monday into Tuesday, it didn't feel like the government shutdown of years past.
No, the other government shutdown of 91 was about 17 days long, and there are some other differences, most notably, a commitment to leave the state parks open over the holiday weekend, and the fact that Maine was no longer in the liquor business, so people could buy their liquor for the holiday weekend unimpeded. But going back to the Friday evening issue, House Republicans indicated that they wouldn't go along with the budget as drafted, that they had their own draft that they were working with Governor LePage on. That was the basis for discussions over the holiday weekend with leadership in both the House and the Senate, as well as some shuttle diplomacy, I guess, with the governor's office. And from that came the budget deal, which wasn't all that different
than what they've been discussing for the previous few weeks. I think personalities get out of the way, and at the end of the day, they passed a $7.1 billion budget that included a repeal of the 3% tax, which was our priority this
critical
session.
For us.
Included more funding for education, $162 million
more than ever before.
More than ever before. Changes to the funding formula were contained in there, so there was a lot of good stuff in there. I think when people boiled it down, they weren't as far off as those thought they were. So.
No, the biggest difference, I think, between the two proposals was the lodging tax, the increase of 1.5% to the lodging tax, and ultimately that was not included in the budget document at the end of the day. So that seemed to be what the House Republicans and the governor indicated they needed, which was no new taxes to close the budget, and a budget number that was really in the neighborhood of $7.1 billion, not a lot higher than that, and that's what they came up with. And the 2/3 was achieved easily, and the governor signed it that evening on the 4th, early in the morning of the 4th, so the folks were back to work the following day. So that's all, particularly the repeal of the 3% is a positive development.
But that leaves us with now dealing with the bills on the table. There's 130 bills that the Appropriations Committee is dealing with this week. Not a lot of money to fund things on the table.
Like $9 million.
Yeah, and then dealing with coming back for a veto day for those bills that are still outstanding.
Which is, at this point, July the 20th at least initially. Appropriations Committee met yesterday. They killed about a quarter of the 130 bills that were on the table. They carried over probably half of those remaining, and the other half they tweaked a little bit, and they are going to send them to the larger body, but without funding. None of the bills that passed received any additional money. They were just tweaked to remove fiscal notes, et cetera, et cetera. So it'll be interesting to see what bills get vetoed. The governor has until the 10 days to act, and the Appropriations Committee is not done. They're committing on Monday.
We still have to deal with bonds. And depending on how that goes. So there's a potential we'll be back on the 20th and maybe even a day beyond that or so.
Exactly. And then, looking at the session overall, there's a large number of carryovers for this legislative session. And that means that a lot of the issues that we dealt with this last 6 months are going to be back in 2018. And that doesn't include a lot of the any new bills that may be submitted.
And I think that was because the session was dominated by the referendums.
Right.
Not substantive necessarily legislative issues. A lot of those issues, I would say, a lot of them got pushed to next session, carried over, because we were dealing with marijuana, we were dealing with the budget with the 3%, we're dealing with the tip credit and things of that nature. So it was a different session than years past.
Yeah, the November referendum questions really dominated the session, and the issue has come about, was the will of the people ignored? And you made a good point to me earlier this morning before we taped this, and that is that, I know that it's not unusual for the legislature to revisit fall referendum questions. But the reality is, yes, the legislature had to deal with, 4 of the 5 questions that were on the ballot, the 4 that passed. They had to make changes to those, some at the request of the people, some to make them legal, and some to make them workable. But at the end of the day, the heart of the referendum questions of November Maine's minimum wage is $12 an hour. Education received more funding than it ever has before. Marijuana is legal in this state, or will be when the law is done. But the fact remains that the intent is for it to remain legal. And ranked choice voting, although unconstitutional through no fault of this legislature, remains in place.
And that was a Maine Supreme Judicial Court decision, unanimous, that it was unconstitutional. So I would put that back on those that ran the referendum.
So that's our wrap-up edition of the week ahead for the legislative session of 2016. Thank you for joining 2017. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to talking with you in January.
Be sure to stay classy, Maine.